Thank you, Travis. My name's Chuck, and I'm an alcoholic. Real happy about being a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous today. It hadn't always be nice back there. Boy, this Hummel Road group, they always cut up when you come over here. Real happy about being a sober... Anyway, I'm real happy about being a sober member of AA today. I've been sober 17 years and 4 months today, and I'm grateful for that time here. And I hadn't always been real grateful for my time in AA or anything else in my life. Sometimes I go to AA meetings and people talk about what a real alcoholic is, and they kind of make me mad. They'll say, well, you know, I didn't think I was an alcoholic. Alcoholics, one of them old boys that lived under the bridge and wore an old overcoat and a hat and drank wine and smoked bugler and all that kind of stuff. And then some folks will say, yeah, them ain't really alcoholics. And I'm one of those that wore an old overcoat sometimes and a big old hat and drank wine and smoked bugler. I grew up in California, and when I was there, that's where I did all my drinking, but I did manage to drink and travel about 30 states. When I was growing up in California, alcoholism was always a part of my life, but I didn't associate the word alcoholism with how my life was. What I associated my life with was my dad was a bad drunk, and he would come home and sometimes he'd make it in the house, and sometimes he'd just be drunk in the front yard or out on the curb. And my mother, sometimes she'd be drunk, and sometimes she'd be out there in the yard with him, or sometimes she'd be in the house. And my mother and father were real angry and real resentful people, and my dad went to jail all the time. He worked, and when he wasn't in jail, but he went to jail a lot for drinking. And a little bitty guy, he was almost as big as I am. He used to like to fight a lot. He used to like to jump on big boys for some reason. And growing up as a young kid, I had that thing of not fitting. You know, I just didn't, wherever I was, I didn't seem to fit in, and I didn't seem to understand what was going on in my life. My mother was real abusive, physically, verbally, sexually, materially, any way that I guess somebody could be. And I just didn't ever do anything. When I came into AA, I tried this the first time I came to AA. I tried it the same way I did everything else in my life. I'd do something for about 5 minutes, and then I had about all that I wanted. And I'd never really done anything prior to Alcoholics Anonymous. And I was growing up out there in California, and I was trying to learn how to be a big, tough guy, because I was sure if I was a big guy and a tough guy, I'd have me a girlfriend, and I'd have me a car, and I'd have me a pocket full of money, and most of all, I'd feel different. And that's really been the story of my life before AA and since AA, needing to feel different about who I am, what I am, and where I'm at, and why in the hell am I there. And when I was about 16 years old, I was sitting on the curb one day with one of them real winos. He was sitting in the curb, and he was drinking a fifth of that Thunderbird wine, and I sat down there on the curb with him, and I was telling him about this problem I had, that this kid at school was always beating the hell out of me, and he was a grade or two ahead of me, and some days I'd go to school and he'd slap me off that bicycle and take that, and some days he'd take my lunch, and he'd just take whatever I had that he wanted. And I didn't like it, but I couldn't do too much about it, because I was a real scared kid, and I was easily intimidated by other people. And today I'm not easily intimidated by anybody, it don't matter who they are. But I was easily intimidated by people, and I was sitting down on the curb, and this guy said, well, you know, I think if you take a drink of this wine, hell, you feel better. And I took a drink of that wine. And the big book said men and women drink alcohol essentially for the effects induced by it, and had not had an effect that time, I'd had no reason to ever take another drink. I took a drink and I felt different. I wasn't any bigger, I wasn't any better looking, I wasn't any smarter, I wasn't any tougher, but down in there I felt different. And so I went on home, and the next day I came back again, and I sat down on the curb and I took a drink of that wine, and I said, you know, I got a problem. And he said, what's the problem? I said, well, this kid up there, you know, he's really giving me a hard time. And he told me that my mother was paying this guy to do that to me. And that made me, you know, kind of angry. I wasn't related to the words angry and resentment and that sort of stuff at that time, but that kind of ticked me off pretty good. And I said, well, what can I do about it? He said, go on up to that schoolhouse and pick you up a piece of lumber with some nails in it and just wear his ass out. And so I walked up to the schoolhouse the next day, and I caught that boy coming out of the classroom, and I hit him in the face with that 2x4 with them nails, drove through it and busted him up pretty good, and got him down there where I could talk to him a little bit. And I didn't really have any more trouble with that fella. He even claimed to be a friend of mine after that. I don't know. That's basically what my alcoholism was like. Everywhere I went, I drank. And everywhere I went, I drank. I got in trouble. And I always got in trouble, and sometimes people didn't even do anything to me. I just got in trouble so I'd feel better, so I'd feel different. What happened to me after that is I continued to drink, and I was 16 years old, and I didn't go to school, and I got in a lot of trouble down in the east part of L.A., and so I moved up to San Francisco. I had an uncle up there that drank a little bit. He was a religious man, and he drank a little. He went to church a little bit, and he painted signs. He was a sign painter. He said, come on up here, and we drink a little beer, paint a few signs, go to church. So I moved to San Francisco to do that, and we painted a couple signs. We went to church a couple times, drank a couple of beers, and one day he said, I don't believe we'll paint no signs today. We'll just drink a few beers. And so we drank beer that day. And the next day he said, I don't believe we'll paint no signs today. Don't believe we'll go to church tonight either. We'll just drink. And that was somewhere around 1964. And the last time I saw my uncle, me and him was both getting thrown out of the house by my aunt. And I had never seen any of them again. I caught a freight train, got on out of town. In the early middle 60s, I was in south part of San Francisco again, and I was drinking. And I found me a new friend now. I was about 4'7" or 4'8", and I weighed about 75 or 80 pounds. And I had this thing that, man, I'm going to be tough, and I'm going to be mean, and I'm going to be big, and but I ain't going to be no alcoholic. I'm going to have me a big car and a lot of money and women and girlfriends and clothes and jewelry and everything that society will deem me successful. And I got to carrying guns around and filling Coke bottles up with gasoline and lighting the rag in the end of it and throwing them at folks. And bad things happen when you do that, and I got locked up there. A gal died. I hit her in the face with one of them. And I was about 16 and a half years old, and got locked up there in San Francisco, and put me in a place that made me sicker when I came out than I was when I went in. And I came out 2 years later on a parole and probation deal, and for 10 years, and my brother put up $10,000, and I agreed to join the Army. And they took me down to the Army base, and nobody could figure out how old I really was, because I had some ID my brother got out of Mexico for me, and took me down there, and they said, is he 5 foot tall? I said he is. Said, does he weigh 100 pounds? Said he does. Said, does he want to join the Army? Said he does. Said, take the handcuffs off of him, we'll take him. And I went into the Army, and for the next 6 years of my life, I traveled all over Europe and Asia and the Far East, and I drank beer, and I drank wine, and I drank whiskey everywhere I went, and everywhere I went, I waved guns around, and everywhere I went, I got in trouble. In 1969, I was up in 68, I was up in town up way north of here, and I was drunk, and I was driving a car, and I hit another car head on. The car caught on fire, and 2 children burned up in that car fire. And I still didn't, I'd been to AA several times over the years, but I really wasn't no alcoholic. I was just a little kid that, I was just down on my luck, and I had a few breaks, and if my folks hadn't been alcoholic, I wouldn't have turned out the way I was, and if I hadn't had all these problems, I wouldn't have been the way I was, and really wasn't no alcoholic. And I got out of that deal, and I left there, and I went to another state, and I was drinking, and I waved a gun around up there, and somebody took it away from me and beat the hell out of me with it. And got into another place, and drinking again, and waving a gun around, and didn't have no bullets in it, didn't know it or something, I don't know, didn't have none anyway. Another guy had a gun, so he just shot me with his. And got some jail time out of that deal, and then again to another state, drinking and waving the guns around and shooting another guy, and he died. I got a little time behind that. In 1969, I went to Vietnam to be a war hero. And I liked that, because I'd heard them boys talk about that. But when I got over there, I had a little different idea about what kind of hero I wanted to be. I really wanted to be one of those that talked about it. I didn't really want to do what was necessary over there. And I went over there in 1969, and 1970 came, and I'd been there a year, and they said, it's time to go home. And I said, I don't want to go home. This is the best place I've ever been in my life. Do you realize that I went a year of my life, and I hadn't ran out of anything to drink. I hadn't shot anybody, and nobody beat the hell out of me. As far as I'm concerned, they're not shooting at me. They're shooting over me, trying to get somebody else. I don't want to go home. This is a great place. And they said, well, you got to have a job. You haven't done anything for a year. We're always looking for you. We don't know where you're at or where you've been or when you're coming back from wherever it is you was. And you're always drunk when we find you. You don't get a haircut, you don't shave, you don't take a bath, and you don't even have no Army clothes. Yeah. And you got to have a job. And so they took me down here to give me a job, and I was in the Army about 5 years, I guess, at the time, and I was a private E1, and took me down to be a shit burner. And they said, what you're going to do is pull these little barrels out of these outhouses, pour a little diesel fuel in them, light it, and the shit will burn, and when it gets done burning, push the barrels back in, and that's it. That's all there is to it. And so I thought, yeah, I could probably do that. So the next morning I got ready to go burn the stuff, and I went down there in my cut-off jeans and my sweatshirt that said love and peace be with you, and my beads and my earphones and my sunglasses and a little something to drink and a little something to smoke and, you know, my lawn chair. And I got down there on the corner where everybody could see me in Cameron Bay, Vietnam, and everybody's going by and said, there's that old wino from California, and I'm waving, hey, I'm the new shit burner, you know. And everybody's making comments about the shit burner from California. And so I got this stuff burning, and I'm sitting there drinking, and I'm thinking, and I, you know, I haven't ever done this before, but there must be an easier way to do this. And so while I had the stuff burning, I just burned all of them at once, and they were all burning so well, I thought, well, I could just go ahead and put them back in now. So I went ahead and put them in, and I burned down 6 outhouses and 1 lieutenant in there taking care of business. I burned him up so bad they had to call a medevac chopper in to get him out of there. And they told me I couldn't even do that. But it came time to come home, and I wasn't coming home, period. No way. I just really liked it there. And so I signed up for another year, and when I signed those papers to stay over there 1 more year, they gave me another job. And all my life, everywhere I've been, people have been telling me, and mostly it's been those guys that aren't easily intimidated by other people, taking me around the corner somewhere of a building and explaining to me how it works. And they gave me this job. I was going to drive a gun jeep, and they told me that what I would do was I'd lead these convoys, and when they started firing at them, I'd go back and get them to fire at me, and when the convoy got through, if I made it, I could catch up, and if not, they'd get somebody else when they got into the next base camp to do that job. And I said, I'm not doing that. And this old Mexican guy and black guy was going to be on the gun jeep. They took me around the corner and they said, we're going to explain to you how it works. And for the next 13 months of my life, I drove that gun jeep, and I understood how it worked. I came home from there in 1971. I'd been there a little over 2 years. I went over there a private E0 for 5 years. I remained a private E0. In the last 9 months or so over there, I got promoted 6 times. I got an on-the-spot promotion from a general. I got 4 or 5 of those rows of them things you put up here so everybody be impressed with you when you come home. And I had all of that shit, and I really knew for the first time in my life I'd excelled at something that I enjoyed doing, and at that time I enjoyed doing what you do with guns. Here and there, I didn't have a problem with it. And I came home and I knew I was 21 and a half years old, and I knew when I stepped off that airplane I was going to be different. I stepped off that airplane and I really was different. My drinking was a lot more serious, and the things were no longer just simply being drunk in public, resisting arrest and disturbing the peace. It was no longer simply going to an AA meeting and being a little drunk. It was no longer just not drinking for a few weeks and then drinking one day, drinking a couple of beers and coming back and trying it again. My drinking was a lot worse, and I came home from the Army. I was a Sergeant E6. I was on a promotion list for E7, and 30 days later I had a dishonorable discharge, busted as grade E1, and get your ass off this Army base and don't ever come back. And I went home to California to be different. And I had a brother, and I'm not going to tell you that I loved this guy. I'm not even going to tell you that I thought I was capable of loving anybody. Up to that time, I'm certain, unless I did it in a blackout, I'm certain that I never told another human being that I loved him or that I even liked him. So I'm not going to say that I love this guy, but I'm going to say that if I could have been anything else on God's green earth, if I could have chose that, I'd like to have been like this guy. He was about an inch taller than me, and that was tall back in them days. He had curly red hair, had a nice red beard, and the girls really liked him. He made a lot of money. He drove fast cars. He went to Vegas and all over the country. Everything he touched he was successful at, and he had everything that society would deem him successful in. He appeared to be relatively happy with himself. And I'd like to have been that guy if I could have been. I went home to California with my dishonorable discharge to be different, and my brother said to me, because he didn't understand an alcoholic, and because he didn't know how to help an alcoholic, he said to me, the only thing wrong with you is you never had an opportunity in your life. And I went around AA for a long time, the first year or two I was here, thinking that nobody ever tried to help me or that I never had an opportunity in my life. Or that old saying that Johnny Harris says sometimes, I was just a guy laying in the gutter, and every time I reached my hand up out of the gutter, somebody kicked me in the face. I don't believe that's true today. I think there were good folks at some of those AA meetings I went to. I think some of those folks that I stole their cars at AA meetings was probably good folks. I think I had a lot of opportunities, but I didn't know how to use them things that were available to me. And I went home, and my brother bought me an art gallery. And I didn't know what it was, and I didn't know how to spell it, but he said you could make a lot of money doing it. And so I said, well, that's what I want. He bought me an art gallery on a Monday morning. On a Tuesday morning, we opened up the place. On Wednesday morning, I went in with a three-piece suit, a brand new Corvette, a pocket full of money, some rings, a nice place to live, and everything that society would deem me successful. And he said the first day on the job, he said, all you got to do is don't drink. And I said, do you realize that I have no reason to drink now that I have a business? And them secretaries, I puked on some of them, but now they think I'm wonderful, you know, because I'm sober. I haven't had a drink in 3 days. Why would an alcoholic drink when he has everything society would deem him successful? As I was looking at it, an alcoholic that ain't yet sober. I said, well, I'll never drink again the rest of my life. I could go to AA and be an old-timer if I wanted to. And I didn't drink. And every day I'd go down to the art gallery and I'd open the place up and the telephone would ring and somebody'd ask me something about art. I don't know what the hell you talking about. What do you want? I don't know. We don't do that. And I'd give the phone to somebody, and basically them girls would run the business. In the first week I made, I don't know, $2,000, $3,000. Next week I made a little more. Next week a little less. Fourth week a little more. I said, well, don't I have to pay any of this to anybody? He said, no, that's your money. That's all yours. Just don't drink. I said, man, I ain't drank 28 days. Shit, I'll never drink again. And then I got thinking, I'd been to an AA meeting one time. A guy named Norm Alford from California taking me to an AA meeting. And he talked about going to that joint down there called the Velvet Turtle and drinking a cocktail, you know, and eating a half a sandwich and going back to his office and taking care of business. I said, hell, I could do that. So I walked out. I said, I'm going to lunch. Walked out of the office, got in that new Corvette, I think. Went down to the Velvet Turtle, I think. Got a drink, I'm sure. Came back a month later. Didn't have that suit, didn't have them rings, didn't have that money, didn't have that Corvette. Had an old pair of cut-off jeans and some of what I call them Jesus shoes, and a shirt that said love and peace be with you on it. And my brother asked me a question I never asked an alcoholic. Where you been? I know, I've been drunk. What have you been doing? Been drunk, lying, cheating, stealing somebody. Where's that car? If I knew where that Corvette was, you think I'd be dragging my ass up this hill here to get to this place? Where's them clothes? I don't know. And then he said to me something that I knew as long as I drank, because that's just the kind of guy I was, that one day that guy'd look me in the eye and he'd ask me that question. And he looked me in the eye that morning and he said, look, I'm going to tell you something. What'd you do at my house? What did you do to my wife? What did you do to my 3 little girls? See, I ain't gonna pick up the tab no more for you drinking. And my kids ain't gonna pay for your alcoholism anymore. You can't come to my house no more. Don't call me on the phone. Don't come to my place of business. Get your ass in that car over there. I'm fixing to take you somewhere. And he took me downtown East Los Angeles and put me on a freight train, bought me a fifth of that Thunderbird wine, and packed in Camel cigarettes, and said, have a nice life. You know, bye. 18 months later, I came to on a riverbank in Shreveport, Louisiana. And I didn't know I'd ever been to Louisiana. I didn't find out till I was 10 years sober. Hell, I was born in Louisiana. I thought I was just a real California cat, you know. I didn't know. Came to on a riverbank in Louisiana. I don't know how long I'd been there. Worse, I don't know what I'd done or who I'd done it to. I didn't know how to tell another human being how I felt about myself, or more important, how I felt about other people. And I started going to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I walked off that riverbank and I went to an AA meeting. And I didn't take a drink for 28 days, and I figured, man, I made it. I'm there. And the next day I took a drink, came back to AA, and I didn't drink for 30 days, and I figured I got it now, and then I drank. Came back to AA, and I hadn't drank for 90 days. Had me a little old place to live, and an old junky car, and an old piece of a job, and got some clothes down there at the Salvation Army, and got a couple of phony rings that looked like they might be something. And I'm sitting on the front row of a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous thinking, boy, ain't it great to be 90 days sober. If they only had what I had. I had no idea what they had, but if they had what I had. And there was a lovely lady sitting the one or two seats over, and I asked her, I said, honey, could I get you some coffee? She said, I'd rather have a beer, big boy. I said, let's go. And that's what my sobriety was worth to me out the door. What happened to me in the next year of my life is people didn't want to have anything to do with me. I was one of those guys that came into AA and puked and crapped and, you know, lied, cheated, and steal, and you know, wasn't interested in sobriety. Give me a couple of bucks. You know, ain't interested in doing nothing about nothing. Went to jail a few times there in Louisiana for, you know, getting in them little ruckuses in them places there and waving them guns around, and found myself on a riverbank and had been down there for some months. drinking that wine and raising hell and panhandling, and decided I wanted to get sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. I decided, man, I'm 24 and a half years old. I've been all over this place. I've done everything. I can't do no more. And it was on August 23rd of 1974, and I walked to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And two things that I'd like to kind of keep fresh in my mind as long as I'd like to be a member of AA, and should I lose that desire to be a member of AA, I don't need to be concerned about these two things. And one thing is, how did I feel that night when I walked to that meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous? I certainly didn't walk in here feeling like I was better than anybody else. And I certainly didn't walk in here thinking I was different than anybody else. And I want to remember what I looked like when I walked in. And occasionally I run into somebody that reminds me. I walked into the back row of that meeting, and I was about 4'8" or 9" at the time, and I was up to about 85 pounds in. I'd done put on a bunch of weight. And I had on a pair of red and yellow and gray and black, white striped breeches. I had on a blue see-through shirt with a string holding the shirt together. Had some old white patent leather shoes with holes in the soles. I'd puked on myself, and I'd shit in my breeches, and I'd been living in that set of clothes for a good period of time. And I walked in the back door of that meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and there on that back row was the prettiest little old girl I believe I'd ever saw in my life. And I was in love, but I didn't know her name. And I asked her what she was doing after the meeting, and she said, "I don't know, big boy, but you stink, and you can have this whole damn row." And they just, everybody's cleared out and gave me the row. After the meeting, some old-timers walked up to me, and I've been around old-timers all my life, and being around old-timers with a desire to drink ain't done much for me. But being around old-timers with a desire to stay sober has done a lot for me. Old man walked up to me after the meeting. He was a little bitty guy, a little white-headed guy, about 27 years sober. And he walked up to me and he said, "Is there anything I can do to help you? Would you like to try to make it this time?" I said, "Get away from me, I'll slug you right in your mouth." And that old man, he must have been 70 years old, he looked me right in the eye, and when he said this, I knew exactly what he meant. And I knew exactly what I'd become. He said, "I'd like for you to." I met an old man in AA. It wasn't necessarily an old man, I'm sure. What I did for the next few days of my life is I tried not to drink. I got sober in an area where they didn't give you a standing ovation when you got a desire chip. They seemed to put a little more importance on some chips that came after that. They were glad you were not drinking today, or at least thought you might like to not drink today, and they were glad that you might want to try to get sober. But in my case, they wasn't real certain. And after the meeting, I went up to get one of them starting over chips, and I got right about there, and the chairman said, "Big boy, I believe you've had plenty, and you ought to hang in for a 6-month chip, and that's all we're going to give you here." And I went back there and sat down. What I did is I put together about 7 or 8 days without a drink. And I didn't drink, and I went to AA, and I lived on the riverbank, and I'd wash that set of clothes out and hide out in the bushes all day while they dried and wear them to the meeting at night. And I'd go to AA, and people would say, "We love you, and we care about you, and it's going to be different." And I decided what needed to be different, I needed to get off the riverbank. So I moved to a little Chinese restaurant that was on a street up there called Market Street, corner of Market and Olive. I don't particularly like Chinese food, but they had a nice big brick planter out there with the hedges in it and a big old sign, and you could get up in there with a fifth of wine, a pack of cigarettes, and the shade to take care of you. You could just lay there forever. And that was just a nice place. So that's where I moved to when I had about 2 or 3 weeks without a drink, and I was sitting up in them bushes with a fifth of wine thinking about being different and a pack of Camel cigarettes. And a man by the name of Ben Hedricks drove up there, and I hadn't opened that wine yet, and he said, "Why don't you come go with me?" I said, "Where are we going?" He said, "We're going to go work on sobriety." I said, "Huh." I said, "Can I take my fifth of wine?" He said, "You can. Or you can leave it there for the next wine that comes up and crawls up in this bush, and if you decide you want to drink at the end of the day, I'll buy you 2 fifths." It's a good deal. Got in the car, and he didn't take me back to the bush, and he didn't take me back to the riverbank, and he didn't tell me that he loved me and that he cared about me and it was going to be different. What he did is he took me someplace and he showed me how to take a bath. What he did is he took me somewhere and put on clean clothes. What he did is put some food in my belly. And he took me to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous where I could come in and I could sit down, and for an hour of my life I could feel better. Where I could come in and sit down here and feel like a human being. Yeah, I had all of the problems on the inside that anybody does when they're brand new in Alcoholics Anonymous. But when you come in here and you're hungry and you stink, you need to get cleaned up. Somebody needs to take you somewhere and clean you up a little bit. Get a little food in that belly. Tell you it's going to be okay. And that guy took me to a meeting every day for 30 days. he decided I probably needed to go in a treatment center, and back there they were just getting going with these treatment centers, and he took me to a place called Pines Recovery Center. Pulled up out there and said, I got an alcoholic. He's still pretty sick. I don't know if he could really walk in here by himself. Come out and look at him. And they come out there and they looked in the window. I was sitting in the back of this big Buick LeSabre. They said, oh, that's that old Chuck Walker boy from California. Man, we ain't going to take him. He'll never make it. That son-of-a-bitch is destined to die an alcoholic. That old boy said, y'all just don't shut the doors too quick. We'll be back next year for him to get a chip here. And I went back next year and got a chip. What happened was he didn't tell me to start working with other people. He didn't tell me to trust God, clean house, and work with others. He said, take a bath every day. Go to a meeting every day. I got a guy that's going to come by here and take you to a meeting every day. I said, we're going to go to that noon meeting? He said, no, you're going to get up off your ass and go look for a job. And you go to a meeting at 8 o'clock at night, is what you'll do. You know. No, you're not going to go sit at some clubhouse all day and piss and moan and groan about what you ain't got. Or piss and moan and groan about what you need. No, you get up at 8 o'clock and you go look for a job. I said, but I don't have a car. He said, walk. I said, that's a hell of a deal. And you be there at 8 o'clock tonight, that AA meeting, and I'll be by to pick you up. But if I don't, you be willing to walk. He said, you don't have to work for minimum wage, but you better be willing to. You don't have to walk to Alcoholics Anonymous, but you better be damn willing to. And I didn't like that. I didn't like folks talking to me that way. I mean, I was different. I'd had a rough life. I'd been abused. I needed a little compassion. And he put that compassion right on me, right where it needed to be, right in my butt. And what happened to me for the next 30 days is I went to a meeting when I had 38 days of sobriety, and I fell in love. Man, I got to that back door, and before I could get to the coffee pot, I said, my, oh my, isn't she a pretty thing? And my sponsor was there, and I said, I'm in love. He said, have you ever had a date? I said, no, but I'm in love. He said, what's her name? I said, don't know. And a few days later, I was married to this gal. She was 2.5 years sober. The gal had good credit, and that may have had something to do with this wedding. She had real good credit. Got married on a Friday afternoon, went to the Friday night meeting. Saturday morning, moved into a house. Monday morning, she said, why don't you go buy your new truck? Hell yeah. I said, you got good enough credit? Oh yeah. I said, call down the lot, tell them I'll be home down there this morning. Went down to the car lot, bought a brand spanking new pickup truck. Walked in there like I owned the thing. It wasn't brand new, it was a demonstrator truck. Had a few thousand miles on it. Got my new truck, went on by to see her at work, got a little money, needed a box of them fancy cigars, cost about $30. So I got 100, got me some cigars, got me some other things. About Tuesday, I said, you know, I need a bass boat. I didn't know a bass from a Christmas tree, but I'd heard a guy say at an AA meeting that he had a bass boat. So she said, well, go get you a bass boat. I said, well, where's a good place? And she said, so-and-so out there. I said, well, call out there, tell him I'll be on out there. And I went out and got a bass boat. So then I said, well, I need a motorcycle. I used to ride choppers when I was a little younger before I drank too much and couldn't stay on one. And I said, well, I need a motorcycle, so I bought a motorcycle. I said, you know, I always wanted a race car. I said, well, get you one. So I got a race car. Got a lawnmower and weed eater and rake and all that shit, cut the yard. And I was about 2.5 months sober. I was at the meeting one Friday night. I was up there telling them how great it was to be sober and in love with somebody I just met. And to have a car and all this stuff. And my sponsor said to me, have you thought about going back to work? No. I said, you might ought to go to work. That girl may not can pay for all that shit. And what had happened to me is I came in here early on, and I compared my insides to your outsides. And I listened to what you said, and I looked at you. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to look like you guys. You know, I wanted to dress like you guys. He got a watch on the left. I better put my watch on the left hand. I surely got it on the wrong hand. He got on 3 rings. I better get 3 or 4. I wanted to look like you. And then I started running around some of them speaker meetings, and I said, oh, my God, I got to sound like that fella. So I started trying to sound like him. And I had it all backwards. What I needed to do was to come in here and put my butt in a chair and keep my mouth shut and my opinion to myself. And they told me that to do that a lot, too. And I needed to try to look at how y'all felt. and see how you felt and how I felt, and what I could do to make that change. What happened to me for the next year of my life, I went to work, and first year I was sober, year and a half I was sober, I worked for this guy that told me he'd always look forward to meeting me. And I'd never met him, I didn't know him. And I was over there the day I was going to go to work and everything, and talking to him about this job, and he said, well, Chuck, you know, he said, I've looked forward to meeting you for years. And I said, well, Mr. McNaughton, I don't believe I've ever met you, sir. He said, oh, yeah. He said, you're the wino who used to sleep under my tree out front there. He said, come in sometime on Monday morning, and you'd be out there, and sometimes you'd be trying to clean your clothes out there in the water faucet, and you'd be rather naked, and, you know, smoking cigarettes and drinking wine, and sometimes you'd crap on the steps there right in front of the door of the business there. He said, I've always been looking forward to meeting you. So I said, well, yeah, but things are different now. You know, I haven't had a drink in a couple months now. And he said, boy, that's amazing. He said, I'll give you a job. I said, what am I going to do? He said, nothing. So what do you mean? He said, nothing. He said, man, if you can go 2 months without a drink, hell, you can help this place. He said, just sit on the couch every day. Come in 8 o'clock, sit on the couch. He said, get a little nervous, need a meeting, just take off and go to a meeting, you know. He said, need a little money or something for some lunch, just tell the lady at the desk, give you some lunch money, and just don't do nothing, and come back and sit on the couch, get tired, take a nap, you know, ain't no big deal. And so I did that for about a month, and one day old boy turned up drunk. He run him off, and I had a job. My year and a half went by sober, and one day he called me into his office, and he said, there's something me and you need to talk about. And I said, yes, sir, I need to talk to you about my stealing problem. I've been stealing from you, you know, a good bit here for a year and a half. And I'm going to work on that. I'm going to see that stops. I've talked to my sponsor now, and we've put all this down on paper. We've taken real good care of it. It's not going to really be a problem anymore. And I turned around to get the hell out of there. And before I get out of the office there, he said, wait a minute. He said, I've never been to AA, but I heard tell that when y'all make amends, you also make restitution. I said, huh? He said, you got to pay that back. And for the next year of my life, I worked 1 day a week free. And I was pretty fortunate. I was one of those guys that came into Alcoholics Anonymous, and when someone said one night at a meeting, or what I thought they said, if you want something, ask God for it, and you'll surely have it. Now, I don't know that that's what was said, but that's what fed this thing. And so I said, God, you know, I need a better job. I'm not making enough money. And I found a better job. I said, God, you know, this wife is nice, but, you know, I've been drunk so long that I've missed so many things I should have been doing in my life all these years that I need to make up for lost time. So it wouldn't be a big deal if I went out to the treatment center there and found me a little girlfriend. You know, I got enough money I could put her up in a little place. There wouldn't be anything wrong with that. So I got me a girlfriend. And got to running around with some fellas that were professional fighters, and I liked that stuff, and I tried that a time or two, drunk and sober. And got into a little money thing. And the next thing you know, I'm working for a big company making big money. And the next thing you know, I'm gambling a lot. And I ain't never been too damn smart, but I did okay on some of that gambling. And the next thing you know, I'm 5 years sober. I got plenty of jewelry. I got plenty of money. I got plenty of cars. I got plenty of girlfriends. Today I know why I had them women, but back then I thought I was really something. Today I understand why I had those. I got this money coming in. I'm running with the big boys. I'm special at AA, only I'm the only one that knows it, you know. All this stuff's going good. And I'm thinking, man, I got it all. And my brother, who had never spoke to me again from that day until 4 years sober, my brother called me up, this guy from California, and he said he was at the airport there in town, and he wanted me to come get him. And I went and picked this guy up at the airport, and I didn't recognize him. I wouldn't have known him had he not recognized me. And I took him to my house, and he wanted to talk to me about alcoholism. And I thought about it when he wanted to talk to me about alcoholism, and I said, he can't be an alcoholic. He's married. He's got 3 children. He lives in a ritzy part of California. He owns a nightclub in Las Vegas. He owns a bunch of car racing stuff. He owns plants here and there, and he runs with some actors and entertainers, and, you know, I've never seen him drunk. He can't be an alcoholic. And I said to him, I don't think that you're an alcoholic. And I said that based more on what I was than what he is. And so I looked at me and I said, I was a Skid Row alcoholic. That's just where mine took. So I can't help anybody else unless they're a Skid Row alcoholic. So I said nothing to the guy, And he stayed 3 days, and I put him on an airplane to California, and he went home and he committed suicide. Now, I'm not saying that I could have saved his life, but I'm saying that I could have directed him in an area that might have made a difference in his life by bringing him someplace and introducing him to somebody in AA. But I did nothing, because I said I'm different and he's different and he ain't an alcoholic. He went to Las Vegas and he bought a nightclub and he blew his brains out. I was 4.5 years sober. I had already been to California to make amends to his little girls. I had already been to California to make amends to his wife. I'd been to California to try to see about that situation with my mother. And when I would go to California all these times, when I'd get in town, my brother would leave town. Wouldn't talk to me on the telephone. I'd write him a letter, he wouldn't answer it. And I did what my sponsor told me to do, not what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do was snatch him up by his neck and force the issue. What my sponsor said is, if you really got this sobriety you profess to have, why don't you just live like you do and let the man do what he's got to do? And you go out there and you set an example of sobriety. You walk softly, you take care of your business, you get on an airplane sober, and you come on back home. But this day that I got the call on a Thursday that my brother committed suicide, and I still had never told another human being that I liked him or that I loved him. I remember telling that gal when I married her, I was marrying her because I thought she was real neat, hell of a deal. And I got on this airplane, I went to an AA meeting, and I got on the airplane going to California to bury this guy. And the plane stopped in Dallas, and I got off and I made a phone call, and I called Alcoholics Anonymous. And I said, I'm coming out here to bury a guy, and I'm alcoholic, and I'm 4.5 years sober, and I don't understand how you do it. And I got to California at 4 o'clock in the morning. There was a half a dozen alcoholics there waiting on me at the airport. You see, one of the things that I learned a long time ago before Alcoholics Anonymous was I learned how to survive out there. And when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, before I could get this great sobriety, I had to learn how to survive those hardships and those sadness and those pains that were going to come about in my life. They were taught me in the area that I came in. When you come into Alcoholics Anonymous and get sober, that doesn't mean that your life is always going to be a little bed of roses. That doesn't mean that nobody's never going to hurt your feelings or piss you off. That doesn't mean that nobody's going to steal your car or burn your house down. That don't mean that your wife and your kids may not die. But you're going to learn to handle that stuff, and you're going to learn how to handle it sober. And I went out there and I buried that guy, and I don't know what you do. What do you do when the guy that if you could have told somebody that you loved him, would have been the one? If you could have told somebody you liked him, he'd have been the one. If you could have been somebody else, he'd have been the one. What do you do when they die? I don't know. I wasn't experienced in that area. But I stayed out there for 2 months, they tell me, 2 or 3 months out there. And I went around there doing all the things that my brother would have been doing, trying to do some of his business stuff, trying to do the things with the daughter, trying to do the things with the wife, and going to meetings and doing all those things. And when I couldn't do any more, I got on an airplane and I came home. And when I got home, a couple of months went by, and I got a phone call. My dad committed suicide drunk. And I went and I buried my dad drunk, nearly 5 years sober at the time. And I came back and I was in a hospital. They found out I had a bone disease, and I was in this hospital, and I'd been laid up there about 2 or 3 months, and I get a phone call. My mother tried to commit suicide, and they don't know if she's going to make it through the night. And I get on an airplane and I go out there and I do what I can do. See, they taught me in Alcoholics Anonymous that you just go. You just go and you do what you can, but above all else, you don't take a drink. And if you go out there and you don't drink on the way, and you don't drink while you're there, and you don't drink when you come back, when you get back, you can sort it all out, and you can figure it out where you can work with it. What happened to me for the next 5 years of my life, from 5 years to 10 years of sobriety, every single thing that I wanted, that I'd ever wanted in my life, the kind of house, the kind of race car, the kind of women, the kind of people to run around with, the amount of money, the respect that I thought I was getting. Now, maybe I didn't even have that. All of those things I had. I was certain that I had every single thing that society would deem me successful. I was certain that I had everything that I ever wanted in my life. And when I had everything gathered up just the way I wanted it, I was left with absolutely nothing that I needed. And I was 10 years sober and in terrible shape. I was married, divorced, and married 3 or 4 times in there. And I was married again, and I was having troubles in that marriage, and I was still running around and doing all these things. And when I was 12 years sober, I was hospitalized again, and that medical thing for the last 7 years has been a long, drawn-out process with me. It's always been one medical thing after another. I've had some blood clots removed. I've had a brain tumor. I've had cancer on 2 occasions. And I managed to just go through that sober. But in 1986, a thing happened to me that was a pretty traumatic thing to me. And all those things were gone. I woke up one day, and the wife was gone, the girlfriends were gone, And the money was gone, and the houses were gone, and the cars were gone, and I was left with a 1970 Ford van and a few toolboxes, which I guess meant for me to get up off my ass and go get a job, you know. And I was 12 years sober, and I thought, why does this happen to wonderful people? And what happened to me and what I learned in that period of time, and I like the little saying that we hear around AA. It sounds real cute. It says, I'm right where I'm supposed to be. I love that saying. But what I really love about it is when I'm sitting there and somebody tells you the rest of it. There's more that goes with it. I'm right where I'm supposed to be based on what I've been doing. And what I've been doing, I was right where I was supposed to be, in sad shape. And I had this 74 van, and I was basically living in the van, and I was hustling here and there, making a few dollars. But something was different. And I found out that what I needed today in my life, it had nothing to do with how much money I made, what area of town I lived in, what kind of car I drove, whether I had a wife or no wife, or a girlfriend. What it really had to do, and what Alcoholics Anonymous was really about. It wasn't about people coming here and getting the greatest job they ever had in their life, and that's the miracle. It wasn't about a guy coming here that never knew how to have a relationship, and he met the greatest woman he had ever known in his life, and he lived happily ever after. What this miracle was about here for me was, I came here and I didn't know how to live. I knew nothing about peace and serenity. I knew nothing about these guts that was all tied up on the inside. It's a real terrible feeling to be 10 years sober and go talk at a convention somewhere, and you've done it a dozen or two times before, and somebody walks up to you and says something nice to you, and you walk out of that place and you get in your old hot rod car to drive off, and you say, if they think I'm so wonderful, why do I feel so bad? Or what that old woman, reminds me of this little lady right here, used to say to me, boy, I tell you what, if I thought I could have socked her in that AA meeting and got away with it, I'd have socked her in her jaw. She used to walk up to me and say, big boy, you look pretty good on the outside. How do you feel on the inside? Boy, she used to just piss me off with that. But I couldn't have got away with it, so I didn't do it. And so what I started doing is I started working on the inside. I forgot about being rich. I forgot about living in the right neighborhood. And I forgot about the girls for a while. And when I came out of that hospital in 1986, my doctor, who had been my doctor on all those other medical issues, said to me that day that he saw me in the hospital, he said, Chuck, you've been unconscious for 4 days. You've been in intensive care for 7 days after that, and you're probably going to die, and there isn't anything that I can do for you. But what I am is I'm going to tell you something this morning. All these times I've seen you and all these business deals you've done with these doctors and lawyers, if you're so tight in AA, and you're so tight with God, why are you in such turmoil? You know, if you believe in God, and that's up to you, but if you do, maybe you better go get right, because the day may be nearer than you think. I don't think you're going to live. And I left that hospital, and I got in that 74 van, and I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I sat down on the back row, and I decided what I was going to do is I was going to want to be one of those guys that came to Alcoholics Anonymous. And if I never found a good job, or I never found a woman, or I never found a good car, or I never found a big house to live in, I was going to sit there on the back row, and I was going to be grateful that I had an opportunity to be sober. I found out that this miracle that I was looking for, that I put in clothes and women in houses and jewelry and all of that, I found what the miracle was, that people come to Alcoholics Anonymous who are going to die. They're surely going to die from alcoholism, and some of us are going to kill other people. We're going to kill them by our actions, and we're going to kill them by our words, but we're going to die, and we're going to affect a lot of people. And the miracle is we come here, and over a period of time, we have a desire to live. Over a period of time, we become accountable for things that we did before we got here. Over a period of time, we learn to be human beings and live like human beings. And when those things happen to us, that we get a good job, that's cake and ice cream. That's for coming here and doing your job, taking care of your business. When we find that good woman, you know, that ain't the miracle. That's cake and ice cream. See, if the alcoholic don't have sobriety, and I've had some fine women, I promise you, if you go back to drinking, they're out of there. And those that I met was gals that didn't know nothing about AA, and it took about 3 days, man, for me to run one off. The miracle is that I came here and I didn't believe. I came here and I knew there wasn't a possibility of me being okay on the inside. And I found out that I could be. And I started this thing, and it was real strange to me. I mean, I went from being nothing to being a lot of things, and then back to nothing. And it was strange for me to do that because I couldn't find the peace and the serenity in it. But I got me an old sponsor, and I said, look, man, lay a plan out for me, what I need to do. See, if I was smart enough to figure it out, I'd do it. People come to Alcoholics Anonymous, and I hear people say, I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to give you any direction. You do what you need to do. Well, if I was smart enough to figure that shit out, I wouldn't be asking y'all. you know. I mean, it crossed my mind early on that when a man walks into Alcoholics Anonymous, if he had sanity working for him, you know, he wouldn't be here. If he could make a good decision, which is step 2, sanity is sound thinking, good judgment, if he could do that, he wouldn't be here. And I couldn't do that. And I got this old man to sponsor me. And boy, you know that old saying, if I can make it, you can make it. I thought, boy, this old fool, this son of, you know what, if he can make it, I sure can. Had an old patch over one eye. And he wore an old cowboy hat that had been, looked like a cow had been wetting in it or something. It was wore out. And he wore some old raggedy-looking cowboy shirts. And he wore them old jeans that was wore out, and they didn't really cover everything back here. And he smoked them old non-filter cigarettes, and he'd smoke them till they were so short smoke was going straight up his nose. And he looked like he ain't had a bath in 30 years. And he looked like he don't never shave, but he can't got enough to grow a beard. And I said, well, just how long have you been sober, old man? He said, 42 years. I said, oh. And I got to running with that old man. And what that old man told me to do, he said, be up at Denny's in the morning, we're going to have breakfast. And we're going to drink coffee. And I'd be up at Denny's down there in Florida, and we'd have breakfast and we'd drink coffee. And he'd say, now we're going to go down to my shop, and we're going to play all day. And we'd go down there and we'd piddle around in the shop all day. And then he'd say, well, you're not doing too good today, so we're going to go to a noon meeting, but keep your opinion to yourself, you see. They're not in trouble, you are. And I'd go to the noon meeting, and somebody would say, how about the little guy from California or Louisiana, wherever you're from this time? How about you? And the guy would say, he ain't got no opinion on nothing. Just pass him by. And we'd go to these meetings. And, you know, I would hear stuff like, Chapter 5, if you want what we got, I was 12 years sober, and I still wasn't quite certain what you had. You know, I looked and I saw what you had in the parking lot. I saw what kind of lady walked in with you. That's what you had. I never saw any of that other stuff. I never looked for peace and serenity. I never went to your homes and seen what you was like outside of AA. That old man told me shut up and keep my opinion to myself. He wasn't interested, and neither was they. And when I knew I was going to go to a meeting and I wasn't going to say nothing, then I could go there with the attitude that I might learn something. And I kept going back to meetings, and slowly and slowly and slowly. And one day I was sitting at a stoplight down there in Lakeland, Florida, about halfway between there and Winter Haven. I was going to a morning meeting, take this old fool to talk, and I was on my way to get him. And I was sitting at that red light, and I looked over at the little honey next to me, and got to thinking. I said, man, I got an old 74 van, runs pretty good. Got about a half tank of gas in it. Yeah, I got a couple of bucks in my pocket, pack of cigarettes, a couple of them old big fat cigars. Good woman in my life, nice house to go to. That wasn't nothing. Crossed my mind I was going to be okay. I was going to be one of those guys that was able to make that transition from sober to sobriety. The dictionary says to be sober is to be free from alcohol. The dictionary says sobriety is a standard of living. Yes, oh God. Then I got to go to work. What I found out was I had to learn how to live sober. You know, if you ain't got the drinking resolved after 10, 12 years of not drinking, you know, I don't know, you must be lying about your drinking. I had that resolved, but I didn't know how to live. I didn't know how to sit down with another human being and tell him how I really felt, on the inside. I didn't tell him that I didn't know how to love a woman. I didn't tell him I didn't know how to talk to women. I just knew how to say, hey, baby, what's happening? Let's go. I didn't know how to tell another man how I felt. I didn't know how to help another human being. I used to say, I help people. I was telling a guy I sponsored the other day, oh, yeah, I help people all the time. Back when I had all that money, I let this old girl lay up my rent house for a year, you know, free. Didn't charge her a damn thing, and went on bragging. I didn't know nothing about helping her. If I did, I'd carried a couple of bags of groceries out there and left them, too. You know? I didn't know about helping nobody. I knew about giving, so you'd think highly of me. I was down there in Lakeland, Florida, and my sponsor from Louisiana was sick. And they called me and said, your sponsor's probably going to die. Probably ain't going to make it through the night. And not once in my life had I ever, as far as I'm concerned, went the distance to help another human being, only when I could get something out of it. See, I didn't know. I didn't know how to help somebody. I didn't know how to help them for the hell of it. And Christy and I was living together, and Christy was working. I wasn't working. And Christy came home from work, and I was out in the parking lot, walking the parking lot. I said, Christy, and Christy didn't know much about AA and didn't know much about Al-Anon, but she was learning fast, hooked up with me. And she pulled up in the car before she could stop, and I said, Christy, go in the house, pack me a bag. I got to go to Houston, Texas right now. My sponsor's dying. Probably won't live through the night, and I'll check the oil in the car and be ready to go by. In about 15 minutes, I was down the road, and I drove all night, and I got here from Florida. And I stayed with my sponsor for a month. And I did all the little stuff that, you know, some of the ladies would have done if they'd have been there with him, and I was going to do all this stuff. What was really bothering me, because I'm going to try to be honest, was not that my sponsor was dying. No, that wasn't bothering me because I don't have any control over that. What was bothering me is 10 years sober, I'd stole some stuff from my sponsor's house. I had a key to my sponsor's house, backed up to his garage one day, unlocked the van door and loaded up what I wanted and went on down the road. His wife was even there. I even sat and had a cup of coffee with her while I was loading the shit up, you know. I want to take care of that business, you see. Because when I have a chance to take care of business, when God allows an opportunity for me to take care of some of the past that's eating me up, if I fail on that, if I pass on that opportunity, can I live with it if I don't get another opportunity? And I don't think I could live with it. And so I came and I walked into the hospital and the guy's about dying, and I said, Russell, I owe you $262 and I'm going to pay that out $10 a week, and I'm starting right now. Here's the first payment. And he was asleep. But I did what I had to do. And I stayed there 2 months with that old guy, and we talked about things, and we learned how to talk about sadness and sorrow in our life. And we learned to look at situations that may be terminal, but not necessarily as sadness or sorrow. We learned how to cry a little bit, and I wasn't going to let nobody see me cry. I was tough, man. 4'11" and 3/4 with these shoes on, and 156 pounds. I was tough. Well, I found out I wasn't as tough as I thought I was. What I found out was Alcoholics Anonymous was made up of a group of people that's going to know most everything about you, and they're still going to accept you. Now, I wonder how many people are like me. They come to AA, and they miss it. They come and they catch the little fellowship that goes on here before the meeting and after the meeting. And they come and they talk about alcoholism and the recovery from alcoholism. But I wonder how many really live AA outside of here. You know, when I mess with people in the program, I don't tell them, call me and come see me. I say, come to my house any damn time, you know. I don't care. I'd rather them knock on the door and let them see what they see, take it with them if they can use it, if they can't, leave it there. I don't want to ever think that I've got to change clothes because somebody's coming to my house. Or that I got to change, my wife's got to rush around picking up something because somebody's coming there. Or I got to roll up a bunch of ones and put a 50 or 20 on the outside and make think I got some money. See? Today I don't look at what have I accomplished in this world, but what have I overcome. Today when I sit in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous, I don't look around and say, who's got the best clothes on or the most money? And I don't look around and think I'm smart enough to know who had the biggest miracle happen in their life. You see, a lot of people might accomplish a lot of things in Alcoholics Anonymous, but you bring two people in here and what one has to overcome to make it and another one has to overcome to make it may be a little different. Could I walk a mile in his shoes today if I had to? Maybe I couldn't. Maybe I couldn't do that. I remember saying to my sponsor when I was 12 years sober, he said, what do you want to do if you ever become an old-timer in AA? And I'm not insinuating with 17 years I'm an old-timer, but I said, well, if I ever become an old-timer, what I'd like to do is have me a little house somewhere, and I'd like to have me an old car to fool around with, and an old dog, and a good woman, and I'd like to just go to AA anytime I get damn good and ready, and say whatever I want to say when I go to that meeting. Because, see, the way I was before, depending on who was there, I might not could say whatever I wanted to say. Today, I go anywhere I want to, say any damn thing I want to, don't matter. I said, that's what I want to do. And I worked hard as hell, boy, and rat holed that money and invested in this shit and that shit and crooked deals so I could be there. And when I went broke and lost everything I had in 1986, and I haven't worked from that day to this day, today I have an old house, today I have a good old dog, have a good old cat, have a good woman in my life, have a good car to drive, have an old truck to work on, and I'm okay on the inside. See? And I ain't an old timer, but I'm heading that way. See? I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and I didn't know how to live. And by taking some of you folks that didn't just talk AA but knew how to live it, and take me aside for those coffee sessions, and take me into your homes and spend time with me, and talk to me about living, and talk to me about learning how to love people, and talk to me about learning how to care about people, and talk to me about all these things. I learned some of those things. I was at a meeting this morning, and I heard a guy saying to a guy he sponsored. And I thought to myself, when he said this, I thought, how do you propose to help him? He was saying to the guy, I'm going to be your sponsor, but I'm not going to talk about your job or where you work, or if you even get up and go to work or not when you should. I'm not going to talk to you about your wife, whether you beat the hell out of her or don't. I'm not going to talk to you about lying, cheating, or stealing. I'm not going to talk to you about any shady business deals. I'm not going to talk to you about whether you go to AA or don't go to AA. That's your choice. But I'm going to be your sponsor. And I sponsor 35 more people too, I might add. And I thought, how in the hell do you propose to help him? Alcoholics have serious problems with all those things. And if we don't find somebody to tell how we feel about these and find out how we can change, how do we propose to get sober? How do we propose to change? You know, People may not like it, may not agree with it. People come by, I talk to them about any damn thing. You know, if it's bothering them, we're going to talk about it. Alcoholics Anonymous took a little kid from California, didn't know nothing about living, and Dad know a little bit. Thank you very much.